World Trade Center, Bush, Clinton, Silverstein, Rockefeller, Bilderberg connection. Plans to build the WTC were initiated and chaired by David Rockefeller, a banker, Bilderberg Group member and globalist, who had the original idea of building the center, with strong backing from the then New York governor, his brother Nelson Rockefeller. Larry Silverstein purchased the entire WTC complex just 6 months prior to the 9/11 attacks. That was the first time in its 33-year history the complex had ever changed ownership. Silverstein changed the company responsible for the security of the complex. The new company he hired was Securitcom, now Stratesec. George W. Bush's brother, Marvin Bush, was on its board of directors. Their cousin, Wirt Walker III, was its CEO. According to public records, not only did Securitcom provide electronic security for the World Trade Center, it also covered Dulles International Airport and United Airlines, two key players in the attacks. Silverstein, who made a down payment of $124 million on this $3.2 billion complex, promptly insured it for $7 billion, specifically covering terrorist attacks. Following the attacks, Silverstein filed 2 insurance claims for the maximum amount of the policy, $7 billion, based on the 2, in Silverstein's view, separate attacks. The insurance company, Swiss Re, paid Mr. Silverstein. The World Trade Towers were not the desirable real estate we are led to believe. The towers required more than $1 billion in renovations and improvements, most of which related to removal and replacement of building materials declared to be health hazards in the years since the towers were built, such as the fireproof asbestos that coated the structure's steel. On several occasions the Port Authority attempted to get permits to demolish the building for liability reasons, but was turned down due to the known asbestos problem. Further, the only reason the building was still standing until 9/11 because it was too costly to disassemble the Twin Towers floor by floor, since the Port Authority was prohibited legally from demolishing the buildings. The projected cost to disassemble the towers, $15 billion. How could Silverstein Group have been ignorant of this? How convenient that a supposedly unexpected terrorist attack demolished the buildings completely. WTC Building 7 was a part of the WTC complex, and covered under the same insurance policy. This 47-story steel frame structure, which was not struck by an aircraft, mysteriously collapsed 8 hours later that same day into its own footprint at nearly freefall speed, exactly in the manner of the Twin Towers. How could this have happened? Mr. Silverstein gave the world the answer when he slipped up during a PBS television interview a year later, on 9/11/2002. I remember getting a call from the fire department commander, telling me that they were not sure they were gonna be able to contain the fire, and I said, "We've had such terrible loss of life, maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it." And they made that decision to pull, and we watched the building collapse. Pull is used as industry jargon for demolition. Regardless, Silverstein did not say pull them, pull the firefighters, he said, pull it, as if he was referring to the building while additionally stating then we watched the building collapse. One thing is for sure, the decision to pull WTC 7 would have benefited many people. Especially because it has been reported that thousands of sensitive files relating to some of the biggest financial scams in history, including Enron and WorldCom, were stored in the offices of some of the building's tenants. Some of the building's tenants were the U.S. Secret Service, NSA, CIA, IRS, BATF, SEC, NAIC Securities and Salomon Smith Barney. The SEC has not quantified the number of active cases in which substantial files were destroyed by the collapse of WTC-7. Reuters published reports estimating them at 3,000 to 4,000. They include the agency's major inquiry into the manner in which investment banks divvied up shares of initial public offerings during the high-tech boom. Ongoing investigations at the New York SEC have been dramatically affected because so much of their work is paper-intensive. Inside WTC-7 was the U.S. Secret Service's largest field office with more than 200 employees. All the evidence that was stored at 7 World Trade, in all our cases, went down with the building, according to a U.S. Secret Service special agent. Interestingly, FEMA had arrived and was on scene the night before. Released, September 2000, Project for a New American Century, a neoconservative think tank released a report called Rebuilding America's Defenses, where it states the process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis and the nations will accept the New World Order. David Rockefeller, September 1994, Bilderberg Group founding member, a group their own documents show is pushing for a world government, integrating the United States with Mexico, Canada and population reduction. Even if you do not believe that 9/11 was a conspiracy as the overwhelming evidence supporting this shows, regardless, you have to at least understand that 9/11 was then allowed to happen by our government given the countless prior intelligence. Some of that intelligence includes: during Bill Clinton's term as president, the Sudanese government actually had Osama bin Laden and wanted to turn him over to our government. Instead, our government responded by firing a missile at the Sudanese. 2001 memo to Rice warned of Qaeda and offered plan. MI6 warned the American intelligence services about a plot to hijack aircraft and crash them into buildings 2 years before the September 11th attacks. U.S. intelligence overheard al-Qaeda operatives discussing a major pending terrorist attack in the weeks prior to September 11th and had agents inside the terror group. FBI failed to follow up leads on al-Qaeda terrorism centers on the bureaus, contemptuously brushing aside warnings from French intelligence a few days before 9/11. Britain warned U.S. to expect September 11th al-Qaeda hijackings. The Federal Aviation Administration admitted it had decided not to order a security alert at the nation's airports despite being warned a week before September 11th. Egyptian president says he warned the United States that something would happen 12 days before the September 11th terror attacks. The chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee said that the September 11th hijackers could have been stopped had U.S. officials acted on intelligence information available before the terrorist attack.
He's an architect experienced in steel structures. Now Richard Gage is touring the country with a controversial message about September 11th.
Richard Gage is here to show us why he's calling for a more thorough investigation into the collapse of the World Trade Center buildings. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. It's great to be here.
Well, first of all, give us a little bit more about your background.
Well, I'm an architect of 20 years, a member of the American Institute of Architects, and have been studying steel-framed, fireproof buildings for about that long.
We ask that for clarification because as we get into this, we want people to make sure that you're not just somebody with a wacky idea.
Right.
Okay, you come with some science to you. What is the official reason for the collapse of the World Trade Center towers?
Well, we're told that the planes hit the buildings and there was an explosion and a fire, and about an hour and a half later, in the case of the North Tower, the buildings collapsed due to structural weakening due to the fires. The problem is that we don't have large gradual deformations associated with collapses, and fires in high-rises have never brought down a steel frame high-rise building at all, ever. And what we have, unfortunately, is the evidence in the Twin Towers and the third skyscraper to collapse that day, which most people don't know anything about it. We have the evidence of the 10 key features of controlled demolition. In the case of Building 7, it collapses straight down into its own footprint at free fall speed in the first 100 feet. It's dropping, as you can see, symmetrically, smoothly, at free fall speed in the first 100 feet, 2.5 seconds. This is uncanny. There's 40,000 tons of structural steel designed to resist this collapse.
So what, a 47-story building?
Yeah, this is called Building 7, right a football field away from the Twin Towers.
Okay, so what we're showing is left what happened. In fact, right is a controlled where you are using, or the people who made this happen, used demolition.
Indeed, and this is a direct comparison. And you can see that, indeed, almost free fall speed, free fall acceleration through 40,000 tons of structural steel. That is uncanny. So we have 700 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation as a result of this evidence and the evidence in the World Trade Center that is very explosive. Almost every architect and engineer we show this information to agrees with us that these are controlled demolitions. If we can get them to look at the information, because obviously the implications of a controlled demolition are dark for our country, because that means somebody besides Al-Qaeda was involved, because these have to be easily three of the most highly secure buildings outside the Pentagon.
Now, if that was a controlled demolition, would there not be any evidence at the ground level of explosives within the building
debris
itself? That's the debris that's left?
Indeed, and what we find down there is pools of molten iron.
What does that mean?
Several tons. Exactly. What is that doing there? The first responders see it, the structural engineers see it. It's documented by FEMA, the melting of steel. Normal office fires is what's supposed to have brought these buildings down, along with jet plane impacts. But jet fuel and office fires don't produce molten iron or molten steel. It doesn't begin to melt until 3,000 degrees. But what we have is the fires only produce maybe 1,600 degrees. So what produced all that molten iron? Well, it has in it the chemical evidence of a special incendiary, which is thermite, a high-tech incendiary used to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. Indeed, in all of the dust throughout lower Manhattan, we have a 4 to 6 inch thick layer of this dust, and throughout it we have evidence of tiny spheres, billions of them, several tons of previously molten iron. Well, how does that happen? If you have molten iron, the byproduct of thermite is molten iron, and it's dispersed throughout all of this dust.
Now, you were allowed to go in and get samples and examine it?
Oh, there's plenty of dust. A lot of people have this dust, and 4 of these samples have been sent to physicist Stephen Jones, formerly of Brigham Young University. And they find in it not only these spheres, which others have found too, USGS, R.J. Lee, doing toxicological studies. These spheres have iron, aluminum, fluorine, manganese, very unusual elements associated only with thermite. And there's small chips of unignited thermite as well. This is very high-tech thermite, nanothermite. It's not found in a cave in Afghanistan. It's produced in very sophisticated Defense Department contracting laboratories.
Okay, well, we have an enemy here. That the finger has been pointed to, that this was the work of Al-Qaeda. This was the work of Osama bin Laden, at least to get the planes all going into the buildings and into the field in Pennsylvania and into the Pentagon. Is there no way that they then could still be the enemy that placed those in the buildings first and then did the incendiary device via a plane second?
Right. Well, what you have to ask is who had access to the buildings? Did Al-Qaeda have access to these highly secure buildings? Probably not. Did they have access to sophisticated nanothermite, where the particles are 1,000 times smaller than a human hair? Probably not. Somebody else has to be investigated, and that's why we have 700 architects and engineers demanding a real investigation. We don't have the whole theory as to how this happened, who did it, why. We just lay out the facts like we did last night in the Veterans Memorial Auditorium, and we demand a real investigation. Then they'll find out who, why, how, etc.
Okay. Then let me ask you, I'm person X. I want to place something in one of those buildings. Where would I carry it? How big would it be? Is it that visible that I would be spotted by security? Or could I place it in one of my tooth fillings?
Yeah. We're talking about several tons of nanothermite and ordinary thermite. One would have to have access through security. So the security company involved for the World Trade Center should be thoroughly investigated. And it turns out to be Securicom, Stratosec. Somebody should look and see who's on the board of those companies. Some very interesting individuals turn out to be. In addition, one would have to have the cover of, say, an elevator modernization, which was, in fact, going on 9 months prior to 9/11, so that there were workers throughout the World Trade Center that had access to the hoistway, which is immediately adjacent to the core columns and beams in the building.
You're not trying to freak out the country, but you can't help but feel a little freaked out by this.
Yeah, you're getting it.
Yeah. And of course, this is something we want to talk with you about a whole lot more, and we're out of time. But we do have a great deal of information on our website, knph.com. Thank you very much for your time today.
You're so welcome.
Thank you for
opening
joining us.
up a lot.